Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of The Law of Self-Defense. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca. And today, the day after Christmas, we are going to be talking about immigration, specifically H1B immigration, which is the hot topic right now all over X, thanks in no small part to Elon Musk himself. And it's created quite a furor about H1B immigration. Now, I'll be talking about this mostly in the context of tech immigration from India, but you can just apply what I'm saying to H1B immigration from anywhere in the world, and more broadly, really, to immigration generally. But we're focusing here just on H1B. H1B are special permits, visas that can be obtained to allow non-Americans to come into the country to work here. If they possess, in theory, various skill sets that American workers might not have. A point of contention, of course. Now, the tech space makes extensive use of H-1B visas to bring in hundreds of thousands of largely Indian migrants into the U.S. Over the years. That's per year, of course. So we're talking millions of Indian migrants that have come into the country. And we just, of course, had an election, and Donald Trump won over Kamala Harris. And for many who might consider themselves conservatives in America politics, they felt like they got their breath back, that maybe things were going to be turning more favorably towards less woke, less immigration, more favorable environment for actual Americans, particularly, by the way, perhaps even white male Americans who've not had an easy time of it under the last several decades of affirmative action and woke and DEI and all that nonsense that we kind of hoped the election of President Trump might put the brakes to. But Trump just announced that he's proposing as a special advisor to his administration, and very successful Indian gentleman, of an American citizen now, but of Indian ethnicity, came to America from India, who is 100% for, by all appearances, allowing for infinity Indian migrants into the U.S. And Elon Trump weighed in when people began to push back on this notion, saying, if anything, we need less immigration to the U.S. Elon Musk pushed back, saying essentially, hey, if America wants to be winning, we have to get the world's best talent here. Well, when framed in that regards, I guess it sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Here's actually what Elon wrote. It comes down to this. Do you want America? Let's see if I can make that a little bit bigger for everybody. You know, and I'm actually not going to make it bigger. I'll do this instead. Let's see. That's better. Elon wrote on X, it comes down to this. Do you want America to win, or do you want America to lose? If you force the world's best talent to play for the other side, America will lose. End of story. And he got a response from Homath, who I'm a big fan of. I would encourage you to follow him on X. He writes back, if you replace all the people in America with these migrants you want to bring in from India, America loses. And I put it a somewhat different way. I responded to Elon with a little pretend dialogue. Elon, well, don't you want to be the best household on the block? And America says, sure, sounds great. Elon's like, awesome. All you have to do is replace your family currently in your house with a family of third world migrants. And I think that's what's shocked America. This does not seem a reasonable proposal to many Americans. Now, I do think it may be a case of many of us, on the one hand, and Elon Musk on the other, watching two different movies on the same screen, just having somewhat different perspectives. And this is brought up here by another X post by Redemption Arc, writes, the problem here is there are two Silicon Valleys. There's the one that Elon occupies, which is building the future of space travel and artificial intelligence, and on the one hand. And then there's very average tech companies which use H1Bs to keep wages low on the other hand. The former, Elon's area, does need the best and brightest. The latter does not. In other words, for the typical case, not the top 0.001%, but for the typical Indian migrant being brought into the U.S. on an H1B visa for tech purposes, the concern, based on good reason, is that they're not being brought in because they have exceptional skills not possessed by Americans. They're being brought in because they'll do the work cheaper, to the detriment of Americans. And Americans, shockingly enough, find that proposition unattractive. Before we jump into things, I do want to make kind of a disclaimer, and that is this show is produced without any animus for anybody of any ethnicity or national origin or anything of the sort. I have no hatred of Indians or Indian migrants or Chinese migrants. I wish them all the best, enormous success, raising their nation's standard of living, developing their own IT tech empires, having great success for themselves professionally, health, wellness for their families. Now, I'm going to be reading through a lot of posts from X. Not all those posts represent my view of this migrant situation or the migrants themselves. Some of them are a bit caustic. I'm reading them to share with all of you how some people feel about this migrant H1B Infinity Indians scenario. They're not happy with it. They express that in their X posts. And I'll be sharing those expressions with you. But we at Law Self-Defense, and I personally, don't have any animus or hatred for any of these migrants. If I were in their position, I would want to come to the U.S. too. But my concern is what's in America's interest, primarily, and the interest of Americans. So it's from that perspective that I approach this H1B, Infinity Indian migrants into the U.S. tech sector kerfuffle that's been percolating. And the last thing I want to mention is we are, believe it or not, the Law Self-Defense YouTube channel at 99,286 subscribers as I record this. This is a real-time number. It'll change over the course of recording today's show. It would be great to get to 100,000. So if you're not yet a subscriber to our content and you like our content on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. That would be much appreciated. We'd, again, love to hit 100,000, as you might imagine. If you believe you're a subscriber, check, because YouTube has a tendency to unsubscribe people without telling them. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe to the Law Self-Defense YouTube channel, and we would certainly appreciate it. With that said, let's go ahead and jump in. Now, I do want to touch on something that apparently is controversial. I can't imagine why. But it's the notion that America ought to be primarily for Americans. America ought to prioritize the interests of Americans over the interests of citizens of any other nation. I got a lot of pushback on this. Apparently it's wrong. Apparently that's something called nationalist. It makes sense to me. It sounds nationalist to my ear. Why nationalist is supposed to be wrong is unclear to me. I pushed back on some of my critics by noting that America's priority should be serving the interests of Americans. That this is a controversial statement illustrates the threat to America nicely. And of course, I mean to American interests. And this is reflected in a poll that Jack Posobiec put up yesterday. Should U.S. workers be replaced with foreign labor via H-1B programs? Well, apparently 5.4% of respondents said yes. But just about 95% said no. And I am with the no group. I also noted I'm seeing a whole lot of Indians suddenly terrified that Americans are waking up to how Indian immigrants have been gutting opportunities for actual Americans. And in my view, they ought to be worried about it. Again, I had written, America's priority should be serving the interests of Americans, that this is a controversial statement, illustrates the threat nicely. And I got a nice response from Firesign, who wrote, very true. And a further point, I think we've discovered why the American birth rate has collapsed. If your majority ethnic population is being replaced over several decades in education and the workplace, can't find a job or meaningful work that pays well enough to marry and start a family and have a home, mass influx of migrants has depressed wages across the board in every vocation, and your society is unstable with non-native people who don't understand or adhere to the culture, then you're not going to have children. I believe these are directly related. And I think there may be good cause to believe that. Here's a graph. 2023 U.S. fertility resumes its decline. And at the bottom there's a comment from none other than Elon Musk, who says this is troubling. I find it ironic. He recognizes the real risk of population collapse, sees that it's happening in the U.S. He's a very smart guy, but he seems unable to connect the dots between this collapse in fertility and the stripping away of opportunities for Americans, especially white male Americans, over many decades. Because often what we hear is, well, we have to bring in these Indian migrants on H1B visas because there's not enough Americans in STEM, in engineering, in tech. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that might be true. First of all, I'm not at all sure it is true. I don't believe it's true. I believe there's not enough Americans in tech who are willing to work under the conditions that Indian migrants are willing to work. That might be true. But I don't believe that they don't exist. I don't believe that the heritage that built Western civilization, that put men on the moon, suddenly lost interest in being creative engineers. I just don't believe it. I think there are forces in America that are working hard to tamp down the ability of Americans, particularly white male Americans, to pursue those paths that they traditionally dominated. Here's one. Not enough Americans are taking STEM because they know they won't get considered. It's a big problem. We'll talk about it in some more detail. But Americans, especially American males, white males, have been subject to decades of deselection from competitive academic and employment opportunities. We all know this to be true. They're dead-ended when they go into these fields, when they apply to these academic programs, when they try to get the degrees. They're deselected in favor of immigrants at the earliest stages, throughout their academic career, should they have one, and then when they try to transition from academia into the professional workplace. Here's another perspective. There really isn't much of a purpose for a system based on English common law when an entire nation gets flooded by people whose entire cultural sensibility is alien to it. Indeed, I responded. What percentage of America needs to be first-generation migrants before we don't have an America? In any meaningful sense. People who don't have a tradition of a Bill of Rights, of a revolutionary war to create the nation, of a civil war to hold that nation together. They don't have a 4th of July. They don't have a George Washington who chopped down the cherry tree and told the truth. They just don't have those cultural facets. And you don't acquire them simply by stepping onto American soil, even if you're stepping on American soil with the best of intentions. And there's good reason to believe that many of these Indian migrants are not stepping on American soil in the interest of America, that they're doing it in their own interests, often contrary to the interest of America. I think America has an intrinsic value. I think America is exceptional in a very positive way and for good reason. There's no other nation on earth like it. That's why they're coming here. That's why we don't have millions of Americans fleeing for opportunities in India. Another comment I made on Twitter, having people smart about tech, I'm quoting someone here, having people smart about tech and the future of AI is good for America. Well, as a blanket statement, I suppose, but at what cost? I would propose that having people who actually care about America is even more important. There's 1 billion people in India. Do we just import them all? Do we just make America India? Is that what we want? Or can they be reasoned discussion about whether and how much third world migration over what period of time and for what purpose and at what cost we want in our nation? Instead of this childlike view that it's an automatic good, unquestioned good, to bring in millions of Indian migrants into the U.S. to the detriment of Americans. Another interesting comment here. This is another good follow on X. Ali D, I'm a big fan. She writes, people are not passing the logic test on legal immigration. People don't just immigrate with their talents, whatever that means. They immigrate with their values too. Americans think legal immigration is superior when it was legal immigration that dropped off thousands of Haitians in Ohio. And it's legal immigration that got Canada defrauded by Indians who abused the system. Moratorium now, I'm sure what she means is Americans think legal immigration is broken when it's bringing in thousands of Haitians into Ohio and got Canada defrauded by Indians who abused the system. Moratorium now. And by the way, folks, that is my position. What we should be doing today in America is an absolute 5-year moratorium, 5-year minimum moratorium on all migration into the U.S. from any nation for any reason until we fix our own house. They'll still want to come in 5 years, folks. There'll still be only the one America. Where are they going to go? China? Like China accepts immigrants? Ridiculous. Another comment I thought was interesting. Someone was pointing out the correct qualifier that high skill isn't a sufficient condition, although it is a necessary one to be qualified for migration into the U.S. Yes, we only want to bring in good people. Bringing them in still has to be in the interest of America. Just because they're high skill, and by the way, the large majority of them are not high skill relative to American alternatives. But even the ones that are high skill, just because they're high skill doesn't mean that's enough. We wouldn't bring in the highest level Indian tech executive if it turned out he liked children or assaulted women. Character, culture, values, that matters too. It's not just the money or the skill set or the merit. Here's another one. When these migrants come in, Kate notes, they remake cities and counties. Entitled behavior. Their kids are taught they aren't Americans, even though their kids are born here. It's hundreds of thousands outside of Atlanta alone, and there are many other urban centers with a similar experience. This is Canada's experience. In just a few decades, Canada's reached the point where fully a third of the Canadian population is foreign born. I don't mean the children of migrants into Canada. These are foreign born migrants in Canada. A third of Canada was not born there. I think it's about half that for America. Is that not enough? Are we bringing in too many migrants too quickly for too little reason at too great a cost? Or are we not allowed to ask those kinds of questions? Here's another comment I found interesting. JP, I don't care if they're the best in the world. Unless or until American high school workers are at 0% unemployment, no foreign high skilled workers should be imported. Only exceptions should be when no qualified American candidates exist. And by the way, I've been referring to the H1B program, which is the one that brings in the large majority of these Indian tech migrants. There is an alternative program called O1. O1 is for true geniuses. So the true geniuses we say we want to attract to America, they don't need H1B. They have the O1 path to come in. So by definition, H1B is not for the top tier geniuses. It's for the lower tiers of purported high-skilled workers. Here, this guy's referring to the person Trump has announced he's picking to help him with these tech immigration issues. The American citizen of Indian descent, very successful businessman, it would appear. I've never heard of him before myself. But this guy writes that Siram, if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, I apologize, is an amazing human being, and America is lucky to have him. But the tech community should also hear MAGA's points. 1, immigrants should be skilled and aligned with American values. 2, immigrants should assimilate to American culture. Without this, America becomes the third world. Indeed. And by the way, I got lots of accusations of being racist and bigoted, and a new phrase now is out there by the non-role-playing characters. Right woke is what they're calling us now, because woke has become so damaged as a label of value that the left has said, well, if it hurts us, we'll apply it to the right as well. But in working with Indians in my career and interacting with them online, many of them are pretty racist and pretty damn nationalist. Ask them about India. Sure, they came to the U.S., but don't insult India. They'll get very upset about it. And of course, they seem to have poor emotional control. My observation on the internet. Here's this gentleman, apparently a prominent voice in the Indian community on Twitter, almost 80,000 followers there. There's a whole bunch of his links and so forth. What's he got to say? He says, well, he doesn't like the arguments being made to reduce or eliminate H-1B visas. He says, I was there before, I will be there after. Speaking as an Indian, we shall overcome. We shall assimilate. We will replace. Is he here to help build America, to integrate into America? Or is he here, and he's speaking for Indians here, to replace Americans? To replace Americans. And I think we get a clue as to what's actually going on when we look at remittances from many of the migrant groups that we allow into America to leverage the many opportunities available here and not available elsewhere, or they'd be going elsewhere. They gather up the US dollars that they earn here, and they send a lot of them home. A lot of them home. This is a collection of almost $140 billion a year exits the U.S. economy, sent back to the homes of these migrants, what they consider their actual homes, not America. Are migrants who come to America here to build America, integrate into America, when they're sending $140 billion a year out of the country? And for India, that was 2016 figures, by the way. It's much larger now because we've allowed in many more migrants. In 2023, for Indian migrants alone, $125 billion being sent by Indian migrants out of the U.S. back to India. Is that in America's interest? I would suggest not. And then we get this weird claim from some of them that they're actually better Americans than Americans are because we were just born here. They chose to come here, so that makes them better than us. Eric Katakana says, you're American because of the circumstances of your birth. Immigrants are American because of their intentional effort. Guess which one is more likely to love America? Well, it depends on what you mean by America, doesn't it? Is it the very concept, the heritage, the culture of America, which is how Americans view it? Or do you love America as a economic enrichment zone where you can come here and make money and send it all home? Because the data suggests the latter. You don't love America for America. You love America for the opportunities America gives you. We're not obligated to do that. Just saying. Another thing I saw on Twitter a lot was that, well, the U.S. was built on immigration. Immigrants built America. Okay. But I would suggest that immigrants and migrants are not the same things. Here's a good example of my thinking. This is not by me, but it aligns with my thinking. America was built by immigrants who ground their fingers to the bone with 10 times more talent and hustle than today's migrants will ever possess. God bless America, and God bless the immigrants that made the greatest country on earth. In my mind, immigrants are people who come here to integrate and build America. They're not sending hundreds of billions of dollars back to their native country. They're not raising their children as Indians when those children are born in America. I'm the grandson of immigrants. My family's immigrants were alive when I was young. I heard their stories and what drove them. It was to build a life here in America, to become Americans, to help create and enrich America. It wasn't just to make money and send it back to Italy. Here's another comment. This one is from a Devin Brown. He says, well, you can say that about every other ethnicity. America is a nation of immigrants, a nation of immigrants. My response is America is a nation of, should have said immigrants. They were almost entirely European immigrants with a shared Western culture who came to build a nation and integrate into American society. The tens of millions of H1B, Indian, and other migrants do not share the same culture. And in any case, they largely see America as merely a zone of economic looting from which they can send billions of US dollars back to their actual home nations, the nations they consider their actual homes. Another comment here I saw on Twitter that I agree with. Daniel Vassallo writes, I'm pro-immigration, but against mass immigration. Scale matters. And a very fast rate of immigration can certainly dilute local culture negatively, as seen in many places in America. Not to mention strain infrastructure, housing, as many things cannot scale up instantly. You finding the cost of housing high, folks? You think maybe the fact that you're competing for that housing with tens of millions of migrants, legal and illegal, might be driving up the cost of housing? They all live someplace, all those people. Is that in the interest of America? Of Americans? I just don't think so. Also, what I see on Twitter is very little in the form of substantive argument. They'll say things, they'll make these superficial claims, but when you challenge those claims, you don't get counter-argument. I don't get counter-argument. I don't see anybody else getting substantive counter-argument. I am getting a lot of blocks. And my experience was really reflected by this comment. Bennett writes, you'll notice that there are no substantive arguments on the other side of the immigration debate. All they have is the same resentful, small PP cell, you're weak, that cap that they deploy anytime they need you to shut up about your dispossession. And I certainly had that experience. One after another, I saw people making claims, taking positions, pro-migrant positions, and I'd go to reply to their claims. You can't reply because they've limited who can reply to them so they don't have to endure the humiliation. Here's another one. I wrote, the truth terrifies them to such a degree that they can't bear the replies. They're such cowards, unable to intellectually defend their support of infinity Indian migrants. The let's swamp America with tens of millions of third world migrants to the detriment of actual Americans crowd is so confident in the intellectual merits of their position that they simply block replies again and again and again and again. And I could have put dozens of these up here as examples. It's contemptible. They're asking a lot of America to let in millions of third world migrants. And they have nothing but the most superficial arguments for it, and no defense against our arguments against it. What we do get is lots of smears. Certainly I did. Lots of this kind of stuff. So I'm supposed to be a bad person for having concerns about this. This top post here is telling me that, well, you know, people used to be anti-Irish, and then people were anti-Chinese, and then people were, you know, you're just an immigrant hater. And my response is, you act as if none of us work with or interact with the millions of H1B third world migrant tech workers already brought to the U.S. You act as if the only reason we're saying enough is because we're all bigoted racists. Folks, the hate labels don't work anymore. I don't care if you call me a racist or bigoted or right woke. It doesn't bother me. I see it for what it is. I see you. You hateful little monsters. He followed up. He says, I'm just pointing out that you're part of a long history of this kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric against many ethnic groups. And my response is, I'm 100% for immigration. Small-scale immigration of people who will contribute to the culture and values of America and integrate into our nation. I'm against massive third world migrants who see America only as an economic zone they can loot to send billions of US dollars back to their home nations to the detriment of actual Americans. That you, Seth Bannon, refuse to see the difference exposes your lie. And then the insults, of course. Why would Indians be scared of autistic retards? Good argument. Tim writes, Andrew, have you always been this racist? User 7341. By the way, these all have like single and double-digit follower accounts. It's remarkable how much bullshit racists come up with to cope when evidence craps on their worldview. Judgy Hall Monitor writes, I take it an Indian immigrant stole your job. No, my interest is not personal. My interest is national. I care about my country, and I care about my fellow Americans in that country, and I value their interests over the interests of third world migrants. I responded to that one. This is the low level of thinking that justifies entirely eradicating the H1B system. These are the arguments they come up with to support their H1B system. Then there's more the kind of mocking stuff. This is where people, they can't lie that it's a problem, but they'll just say, basically, it's your problem. Raconteur writes, yes, this 93,000 H1Bs offered by the U.S. That's every year, by the way. And of course, it's been going on for many, many years and would be expected to continue for many years if nothing changes. So we're actually talking about millions of Indian migrants alone. But of course, they have to minimize the effect. Yes, the 93,000 H1Bs offered by the U.S. are really hurting your chances of getting a job. You contemptible loser. Here's another one, Undercover Economist. By the way, when you see these repeated arguments that are identical, it's just like, these are bots, obviously. Bro, H1B is 93,000 people, LOL. The total workforce is 140 million. They are not the main cause of you being out of work, LOL. These kind of arguments, they've already actually conceded the point. It's part of kind of the liberal cascade, progressive fascist lying. You've all seen this, I'm sure. First they say, no, the thing you're claiming is happening. That's bad. It's not happening. That's not happening. Denver apartments are not being taken over by Venezuelan gangs. What's wrong with you? And then they progress from there when their position is destroyed. They'll say, okay, it is happening. But it's like only a couple of apartment buildings. It's minor. And then they'll say, you know what? It is happening. And it's actually a good thing. It's a good thing that these Venezuelan migrants are taking over apartment buildings. Let the private market pay for their housing by having their property stolen. And then ultimately they get to the point of, you know what? The real problem here is not the thing you think is bad. It's you complaining about it. It's you complaining about it. That's these people. That's these people. They're at that last stage of lying. And then I thought this was a good comment as well. Just Loki writes, I don't have a dog in the fight of who should work in Silicon Valley, but I have to say, the side that is trying to make a case for infinity Indians forever seems to be spending a lot of time saying, you racist white devils are going to get destroyed. And that does not seem to me a compelling argument to Americans. And Americans are suffering. They are suffering under the current system, especially white male Americans. And Americans are suffering under the current system of migration into the U.S., particularly white male Americans. This is a series of comments now. This is one long tweet I'm going to share with you in parts because I thought it was particularly compelling. And I know it's just one. There were many more. This was one of the lengthier ones, but the more detailed ones. And the greater detail brings the ring of truth. So I want to share this entire lengthy post with you, and then I'll show you examples from other people. Jay writes, now that H1B has become a topic of discussion, here's my story. Born in Appalachia, went to a top-tier university, interned in wealth management and training, recruited for all the top investment banks and research firms. Only offer I received was to cold call South American high net worth individuals on a commission-based salary, $10,000 base. Could not afford to take the job because cost of living in New York City was too high. All my foreign-born friends and classmates got the jobs dreamed of and worked my whole life for. They weren't more skilled than me. In fact, most were less skilled. 6 months after graduation, I took a $15 an hour job at a geopolitical analysis startup. I received effectively zero equity, thanks Silicon Valley, worked the night shift for $60,000 a year, slept on the floor of that office many nights, lost money for 3 straight years. After 5 years, I was the most tenured employee at the company other than the founders, finally got up to $80,000 per year, then was fired within a year of relocating for them across the country. Many of my foreign-born classmates were extremely successful investment bankers and financial professionals by this point, jumping from JP Morgan to Facebook to private equity and so forth. Once again, I applied everywhere, including Palantir and government agencies that I was extremely qualified for, didn't get a single interview anywhere. Not even low-level data analyst positions. Here's the point. The very people telling you that we need H1B are the same exact people who wouldn't even give me an interview despite having impeccable qualifications. No American institution ever helped me, an American. They stole my family's wealth and took advantage of me. We don't need an H-1B program. We need to believe in and invest in Americans. The American system as it currently exists is a complete scam that exploits the American people more than anyone else. I don't believe in victimhood culture. It's utterly disgusting. But as an American, without ethnic connections to capitalize on, you are on your own. The quicker you accept this, the better off you'll be. That rings true to me, and I think that's the story of millions of white American men who jumped through all the right hoops, did all the right work, are smart, capable, committed, conscientious, but they're being compelled to compete with foreign migrants, less capable, less intelligent, but much less expensive to get their foot in the door. And then once they have their foot in the door, they engage in rampant nepotism to hire more third world migrants in place of Americans. Americans are deprioritized for promotion and opportunities. Migrants are prioritized to the detriment of Americans. And I can't see how any of this, remember, we're not talking about the geniuses, the top 1%. We're talking about the bottom 99%. I'm not seeing how prioritizing mid-tier H1B tech migrants is in the interest of actual Americans. More comments, lots of these anecdotes. Noodles Now writes, my kid, national merit, got a BS and MS in chemical engineering and stocked in a Goodwill store for 6 months after graduating with a master's as there were no jobs about 5 years ago. Rich Harrison writes, my nephew graduated with an IT degree and never got an interview in the Atlanta area. He now works as a project manager in a commercial glass company. As a 40-plus year career software developer, I couldn't get a single interview after submitting over 250 applications. Not one. Unfiltered Truth writes, he's not alone. There are millions just like your son. All of my friends who graduated from university are without work. Luckily, I was able to find a job, but I was the exception, not the rule. Balthorium writes, it makes no sense. Kick all these foreign students out of the universities and there'll be more room for Americans. Then there'll be skilled workers. It's not rocket science. Indeed. So when these entities say, well, we'd hire American engineers if we could find them. Well, you exclude them from getting the education necessary to be an engineer. You prioritize everybody in academia over white males. Michael Shewitt writes, I think the worst thing is seeing all the kids coming out of college who can't get a job while we continue to flood the market with quote unquote experienced talent that in a lot of cases, it's not better than you would get if we actually trained our own population. A lot of truth there. Mr. Rogers of Crypto writes, white male American. Almost the same exact life story, but I worked in tech in Silicon Valley starting in the 1990s. Petronius Arbiter writes, I know heritage American Harvard seniors with higher than a 3.8 GPA who don't have a full-time job offer after more than 30 applications. This is degrading. The social contract has been violated. The system is not working for us, the youth. The boomers betrayed us in their love for cheap foreign labor. He also wrote, this is an important story lived by the vast majority of my young friends. Our leaders passed over thousands of heritage American J.D. Vance types and instead gave the opportunities to thousands of Indian migrants who have no stake in our homeland. And that rings true to me. Oh, then this guy noted they ratioed Elon Musk on X, which is just kind of funny. Elon had written, no, we need more than double that number of H1B migrants. Yesterday, he wants to double the number. The number of people who are super talented engineers and super motivated in the USA is far too low. Think of this like a pro sports team. If you want your team to win the championship, you need to recruit top talent, wherever they may be. That enables the whole team to win. DRG had noted, my son graduated with honors with electrical and computer engineering degrees in 2023. He cannot get an interview, let alone a job. Any white male he knew in college can't get jobs either. Many are currently working in data center jobs that don't require the education. And here's the problem for Elon's analogy. It's fine to be concerned about the team as your focus when you're the owner of the team. I understand Elon's perspective. He wants access to the maximum number of what he considers the most high-skilled people at whatever externalized costs that might produce. It's not Elon's problem if millions of young white Americans can't get a job because his companies are doing just fine. And that's his focus, is his companies. And it should be. But just because Elon wants to favor the interests of his companies, as he should, doesn't mean that Americans should allow that to negatively impact America. Elon leverages the assets, the culture, the legal system, the financial system, the academic system that Americans created. Elon didn't come here and create America. America did not go to Elon Musk. Elon Musk came to America for reasons. Those reasons matter. The foundational assets of America matter. And I, for one, don't think America should allow Elon to achieve his remarkable degree of excellence at the cost of burning to the ground the cultural assets that made that success possible. Just one guy's opinion. Here's Jesse Kelly. I like following him on X. He writes, white kids with college degrees cannot find jobs, and most cannot even get a return phone call. This is happening all around me. And when that's happening, you're never going to sell legal immigration to people ever, period. I think that's right. And Farseeker notes the H1B issue is going to be the defining political issue of 2025. College students who have paid tens of thousands of dollars for job credentials should not have to compete with foreign labor when they enter the workforce. We will remember who didn't stand up against this. And he should. They all should. Another elephant in the room, the decades of affirmative action, deprioritization of especially white male Americans for decades now. And many were willing to put up with it when the harm to them, when it only inhibited their professional opportunities modestly. But now its effects are utterly destructive. It's not that people are taking slightly less pay or slightly less prestigious positions. They're being offered nothing. Nothing. And then Elon wonders why there's a population collapse in America. I saw a lot of this on X. By the way, this little racist account here, Cash, is an ex-employee. Writes, racist whites will do anything to save their white race except getting a job and having children. If you're getting replaced, it's because you are incapable of successfully playing your part. It's your fault, white people. You're just not doing enough. My response to that was, as if white men have not been at the bottom of an affirmative action war of academic and professional genocide for generations. You want to compete? Let's compete. Without the racial and gender preferences that favor everybody who is not white and male. I should have brought something up here about, many of you have probably read the short story by Kurt Vonnegut, Harry Bergeron. An exceptionally capable human being in every realm of human endeavor. And the people around him can't take it. So they make him wear headphones that play loud music in his ears to make it hard to think, and thick glasses so he can't see. And they bind him with weights so it's difficult for him to move around. That's what's been done to white males in America for generations now. For many decades. And they say we can't compete. Let's compete. I would love to compete on anything resembling a level playing field. This person writes, you know, all that DEI shit is for white women, right? No. Certainly white women benefit on the gender basis. But all these programs are for, well, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? The intersectionality of race, gender preference, All that nonsense. Why are white people so scared of actually competing? Most white people are mediocre and use nepotism anyway. So is that what you're mad? It's being done back? Even if it were true. Two wrongs don't make a right. And again, law of self-defense, me, writes, I decline to accept anything being done back to me and mine because we haven't done anything to harm anybody. It's not our problem. Then we look at the actual employment participation of white males here, and I've pulled out these charts to make them bigger. This is labor force participation of white people, mostly white males. It's clearly collapsed in recent years. Is it just because they're bored, or is it because there's literally systemic racism against white males in America and have been for years? Labor force participation of men. Anybody think that's good? Anybody thinks that that's just because the men who won World War II got lazy afterwards? It's a comment. Talk to a tech recruiter. Any job they post is blasted by 1,000 Indian or Pakistani applicants, and they do not make an effort to interview U.S. citizens who may easily be a fit. And all this was done on purpose, particularly in recent years. I had this little chart here. I'll go back to it. You see that vertical line on the right? What do you think that's from? What do you think that's from? Could it be from this? DEI initiatives induced corporations to say, you know what, we're not going to hire white people. We're only going to hire non-whites. And that's what they did. 94% of their hires became non-whites. If you were white, you weren't even considered. Is that racist? Anybody wondering? Here's another chart. Corporate America pledged to hire more people of color, and it actually did. Now, white Americans are still the majority ethnicity in America, and yet 94% of the jobs went to people of color. Does that make rational sense? Or is that just anti-white racism? Sherwood writes, nobody really cares about ethnicity. We care that for 50 years, younger white guys have been told by older white guys, we don't get an opportunity because of diversity. Shut the H1B program down until DEI, Affirmative Action, and 1964 Civil Rights Act is eradicated at the constitutional level. I think that's a very reasoned position. I think that would be in America's interest. Here's another view, Charles Haywood. Musk's claim that there are not enough talented and motivated engineers in America may be true, maybe, but the reason for it is decades of vicious hobbling of white men. For example, it is extremely difficult for white men to get into top engineering programs at a university. Most spots are reserved for one of three categories. A, foreigners, Indians and Chinese, who can pay full tuition. B, silly girl bosses who have been preferenced their whole life as part of a push for shoving girls into STEM, including endless girls-only lavishly funded programs, but who really have no talent and less interest for engineering. And even if they did, don't have the drive to achieve of young men. And C, any non-white American. These policies not only produce untalented and unmotivated engineers and or ones not loyal to America, they fatally discourage white men who have always been 95% plus, maybe 99% plus of America's engineering talent. If you erase all three of these policies, you will very soon get massive amounts of both talented and motivated engineers. But we won't, he writes, because we're not allowed to point any of this out. That, of course, is part of the reason for today's show, folks. Mr. X, another good follow, on the X social media platform, writes, well, I'll read Dr. Phil Metzger first. Dr. Phil writes, strange thread. Half are claiming they can't hire engineers because there aren't enough STEM graduates in the U.S. The other half claim they graduated with STEM degrees but can't get an interview or a job. Not sure how to reconcile both perceptions. And Mr. X responds, the unsaid portion in hiring is that there are not enough STEM graduates once you filter out white men and then offer third world wages and working conditions. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Then we get this nonsense. This was perhaps my favorite thing. Along the realm of competition, Vic Von Lustig writes, so complainers, get compliant or start your own company. No redemption for reality apostates. You claim they're selected to lead megacorp because they're good at falling in line, then get good at falling in line. You either don't believe in your assessment of the world or you don't want to execute it, you losers. Here's another one, Frankie Newton. If white men are being systematically discriminated against in such a lucrative field, shouldn't they get together and create a company of their own and make a fortune? If black men were discriminated against in the NBA, they just start a new league. And it would be so incredibly popular, it would put the NBA out of business overnight. That's how you fight and prevent discrimination. Start a company and do it yourself even better. Strategic thinking, very important. Anybody recognize the problem with this? American society has made it illegal for white men to do this. White men are not allowed to set up a white man company and limit it to white men. I responded to Frankie, what this account is describing is explicitly illegal under American law. That's why the compete harder argument is merely a ruse when targeted at white men. They've made it illegal for white men to compete. I would love to see the social experiment. Let's do away with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and allow white men, if they wish, to set up white men-only companies and see what happens. Are all these white men losers going to fail? Everybody can point the finger and laugh at them? Maybe. Maybe. But maybe not. Maybe it'll put the lie to the DEI, the migrant advocates, the gender advocates, the diversity advocates. It would be nice to run that experiment. But of course, it would never be permitted. For reasons I would suggest are obvious. Simple tricks and nonsense notes, immigration of any kind, while whites are legally forbidden to engage in the same kind of racial discrimination every other race uses against us to crowd us out of our own country, is national and cultural suicide. I don't really give a shit about the rest of it. Because, of course, it is permitted to discriminate against white men. That's what affirmative action and diversity are. We saw that in the companies hiring 94% people of color in a majority white nation. And what about this notion that we need all these H1B Indian migrants because, well, the tech industry is starving for people, starving for engineers. They just don't have enough. That's what Elon tells us, right? And again, I think maybe that could be true for the tiny echelon of 0.001% talent that Elon is looking for in his companies. Those guys are rare. But is that true of the millions of H1B tech migrants brought in from India? I don't think so. I think they're largely mediocrities, as one would expect when you get to large numbers. And is the industry actually starving for mediocre tech engineers? I would suggest not. Here's Shoestring Lab with an interesting comment. I will posit the same question to you that I did to Vivek. If there is so much demand for engineers in big tech, why are salaries not higher? Simple rules of supply and demand would suggest that tech salaries would be outpacing inflation if there was an unmet demand, but that's not the case. And I'll enlarge what he quoted here, the summary of it. Over the last 20 years, while there have been periods where tech salaries in Silicon Valley might have outpaced inflation, which isn't saying much, right? Particularly for high demand roles, the general trend shows that for many workers, especially those not at the top of the income spectrum, salaries have not kept pace with inflation, leading to a decrease in real purchasing power. So we're supposed to believe that we have to bring into the country millions of H1B tech migrants from India because there's a shortage of demand, and that shortage of supply. And that shortage of supply is not being met with higher prices? Really? Because I don't believe that. Here's another couple of graphs. I think I broke these out individually, but I'll read the text here. In addition to record unemployment in tech, which is what's happening right now, and information systems, the widely accounted for despair of new grads unable to find work, total employment in these fields peaked years ago. Here's the first of those graphs. Employment peaked just before 2020 and has collapsed since then. Where's this demand for mediocre tech talent? U.S. tech workers, who's been an excellent follow on X for much of this stuff, writes there is no shortage. If there was, real wages would be going up for engineers and software developers. They have been declining. Another one from U.S. tech workers, you can't complain about labor shortages when Intel just laid off 15,000 employees. Semiconductor engineers are plentiful. We just keep screwing them over, causing them to lose faith in job security within the industry. And then you wonder why fertility rates are low. On the same lines, Andrew Torba, quoting, there are major tech labor shortages. We need more H1Bs. These people think you're stupid. And then he quotes another post here. Tech layoffs totaled nearly 150,000 in 2024. Here are some cuts by major tech firms. Intel cut 15,000 people. Tesla cut 14,000 people. Cisco cut 10,000 people. SAP cut 8,000. Uber cut 6,700. Dell cut 6,000. Microsoft cut 2,500 people. PayPal cut 2,500 people. Can I ask if these are Americans getting cut and simply being replaced by H1B migrants? Is there a demand for engineers, or is there just a demand for migrant engineers willing to work at a lower cost under worse conditions? And by the way, one of the conditions for H1B is you're stuck to that employer. Your privilege to be in the U.S. and working is tied to that employer. You can't switch jobs. You think these companies exploit that against H1B migrant tech workers? I can assure you they do. And an account that goes by the name of Your Dad writes, if there was a real shortage, I would see advertisements everywhere for these jobs. It would be extremely easy to walk into these jobs even without interviews. That would be my expectation if there was a desperate shortage for tech engineers. But yeah, we already saw so many of these people can't even get an interview, much less a job, if they're white males, white male Americans. Another question worth exploring is this foreign talent actually better? That's what we're being told. We can't find good engineers among Americans. We have to go to India. The Indian IT tech people are superior. Is that true? Because the research doesn't appear to support that. Here's a study from the Center for Immigration Studies, and I'll link to this in the description of today's show. I'll just zoom into the key findings here. A new study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America counters the persistent myth that the United States is falling behind in STEM. This study looked at the skills of computer programmer graduates around the world by using a standardized programming test. So not local degrees or certifications or things that can be fraudulent, not subjective measures, a standardized programming test. So when you take the subjectivity out of it and you make an objective measure of capabilities, this is what you find. The study strikes several blows to the great American STEM shortage myth. Blow number one, the study found that seniors in the United States exhibit much higher levels of computer science skills than seniors in China, India, and Russia. Blow number two, although seniors in elite programs score much higher than seniors in non-elite programs in China, India, and Russia, they still score lower than seniors in the United States. Blow number three, U.S. computer science seniors from elite schools greatly outperform computer science seniors from elite schools in foreign countries. So at the higher levels as well, Americans are outperforming. Blow number four, the substantial advantage of computer science students in the United States is not driven by the presence of international students. Collectively, foreign computer programmers do not bring higher skills to America. They simply bring cheap labor. The scofflaw writes, the large majority that come in on H1B that come in and then have to be trained to actually do the job still. It's ridiculous. If you're going to have to train them, train Americans. We shouldn't be looking to import anyone until our own talent, our own, are taken care of. Oilfield Rando, another great follow on X. You can't just tell me how great and smart India's workforce is when I actually have to call those MFers for tech support. And all they know how to do is tell me in broken English to restart my shit before elevating the issue to somebody in America. Folks, I would suggest that every one of us has had this experience. Have we not? Have we not called some form of tech support? And Thomas answers the phone with an Indian accent heavy enough that we can't understand what he's saying, and no apparent expertise or ability to solve our problem? Are Oilfield Rando and I the only people to have had that experience? They act like we haven't worked and interacted with these H1B tech migrants from India before. John Carter writes, this is so effing dishonest. The reason this topic elicited a volcano of rage, you disingenuous turd, he's not talking to me here, is that we have had decades of being told these people are highly skilled, world-class talent, and have found through actual experience that this is almost invariably a lie. Some guy notes, skilled immigration is a thought cliche used to shut down honest discussion about social factors, including religious affiliation and societal norms and cohesion. The USA is not just an economic opportunity zone. And Captain writes, these H1B types only get several months of training before being dumped into the job. No reason American graduates can't get the same. This hiring of the best commentary is just a bullshit excuse to replace whites and have cheap, pliable labor. And that rings true to me. That rings true to me. All right, let's transition over to my next series of stuff to talk about. I told you this would be a long show. By the way, I'm taking a quick look. At this point, we are up to, see if I can share this. $99,329 subscribers on YouTube. It would be great to hit 100,000 today, folks. That would be awesome. So if you don't yet subscribe to Law of Self-Defense on YouTube, maybe consider doing that. That would be awesome. It's free, and it would be much appreciated. If you like this kind of content, hit that subscribe button. And if you think you are subscribed, I would go check, because YouTube often unsubscribes people without telling them. So take a look. Pound that subscribe button on YouTube. I appreciate it. All right, on to the next series of topics. Another argument I hear a lot from the infinity Indian migrants crowd is, but look at all the CEOs of all the big tech companies. Look at Google. Look at all of them. They're all Indians. Doesn't that prove to us that these Indian migrants are bringing exceptional value to America? Here's an example of this kind of post from Dr. Parikh Patel, classic Indian name. The CEO of Google is Indian. The CEO of Microsoft is Indian. The CEO of Adobe is Indian. The CEO of IBM is Indian. The CEO of Chanel is Indian. The CEO of FedEx is Indian. The CEO of Palo Alto Networks is Indian. The CEO of Perplexity is Indian. So yes, Indians are, he claims, high-skilled immigrants. First of all, look at the logical fallacy here. He lists 8 people. And even if we were to presume that these 8 people were world-class talents that could be unmatched by Americans, it's 8. No one's arguing against bringing in 8 Indian migrants. We object to bringing in millions of H1B Indian tech migrants to the detriment of Americans. So this is the kind of lying by sleight of hand that these people engage in. Here was a pretty good response to this by an account, John Carter. He writes, Google, founded by white guys. Microsoft, founded by a white guy. Adobe, founded by white guys. IBM, founded by white guys. Chanel, founded by a French woman. FedEx, founded by a white guy. Palo Alto Networks, founded by an Indian, an Israeli, a Chinese guy, and a white guy. Perplexity, founded by an Indian guy, a Chinese guy, and 2 white guys. This suggests a pattern that all these companies were founded overwhelmingly by white men, but today, as mature companies, are managed by Indians. He writes, this suggests a pattern. Indians are extremely skilled at climbing the hierarchies of established corporate bureaucracies, but not really so good at innovation, which is almost entirely the domain of white men. Also worth pointing out that those companies that got taken over by Indians have mostly gone to shit. Google is a case in point. It's practically unusable now, which indicates that Indians are very good at getting themselves hired, but not so great at actually competently running things in the long term. One man's view that rings true to me, as reflected in my own comment here. It's remarkable how these companies assigning Indians to their senior management ranks coincides with them transitioning from being world-class leaders in innovation to being massive hulks of technological mediocrity. None of those companies that were listed as CEOs who were Indian are today cutting-edge technology companies. Lord Miles' official writes, the Indian CEOs, didn't build any of those companies. They are parasitic who get diversity quotas. Unbiased Clown Report writes, yet none of those companies came from India. Remarkable. Greg writes, Intel is the best example from completely dominating the CPU market, including owning their own factories and advanced semiconductor processes, to being worth the rounding error of NVIDIA's market cap. Stephen Hines writes, this has been my experience. From a software engineering standpoint, Indians are well trained in processes and tool sets, but when it comes to critical creative aspects of software design and development, they lack imagination. And what about these Indian CEOs? Well, on the left is the CEO, on the right was the chief legal officer. These were the people who were running then Twitter, when Twitter was rampant with suppression of free speech, to the point they banned the Babylon Bee, a key factor, humorously enough, in Elon's decision to buy Twitter. And when he bought Twitter and renamed it X, did he keep these Indian CEO and legal officer, or did he fire them? They're not all worth having, folks. Even Elon doesn't think that. Trading Nerd writes, define caring for America. If these smart people don't exist, your tech companies don't exist, and your economy collapses. How do you care for America? Because I've been indicating that I care for America. And I responded, millions of migrant Indians are not required for America's tech industry to exist. The cutting-edge American tech companies were overwhelmingly created and founded by white American men, virtually none by Indian migrants or even Indian Americans. The last comment on this point, Daniel C. Indians are the ultimate brown nosers, and hence why they do well in large bureaucracies. Kissing ass, being subservient, and kowtowing to their superiors is ingrained in their DNA. The creative types in large core are all whites or Orientals. The admins are Indians. Now, I don't have personal experience with these aspects of the tech industry. I'm merely reciting what people with claimed experience are sharing. But a lot of people feel this way. And that has political import, whether you like it or not, or at least it certainly should. Something else I hear from the Infinity Indian Migrants crowd is, but you have to import millions of third world migrants into your tech centers, because how else would you get geniuses? That's where the geniuses come from. I wonder how true that is. Here's a guy responding to Elon. Elon had written, your understanding of the situation is upside down and backwards. Of course, my companies and I would prefer to hire Americans, and we do, as that's much easier than going through the H1B process. But he goes on to say, but this is where we find geniuses. And Lomez writes, there's a bait and switch that keeps happening where on the one hand, we're referencing extremely talented engineers. We need to build rocket ships. But then the policy question hinges on a glut of replacement level talent who are shipped in to max out ad click-through rates. In other words, mediocrities. I read this comment earlier, but I'll read it again. The problem here is there are two Silicon Valleys. There's the one that Elon occupies on the one hand, which is building the future of space travel and AI. And on the other hand, there's very average tech companies which use H1Bs to keep wages low. The former does need the best and brightest. The latter does not. The latter does not. Then we get this kind of nonsense. Alex Stapp, whoever he is, writes, the U.S. is the world leader in science and technology, in large part thanks to immigrants. Note that he just says immigrants generically. And we're supposed to believe from the context that he's referring to Indian migrants. Might he be referring, might this data be reflecting almost entirely Western European immigrants? He's got this headline here. Immigrants have won 40% of Nobel Prizes awarded to Americans since 2000. Well, here's a response to that from Arctotherium, who writes, about as many 21st century U.S. immigrant Nobelists are British as come from all of Asia combined. There are 0 Indians. The group Stapp is dishonestly trying to associate with these Nobel Prizes. And sarcastically, the same account writes, want a handful of European geniuses in America? I guess you need to import 1 million Indian migrants, H1Bs. Does that make sense to anybody? Or could we maybe just import the Europeans? And again, we need to distinguish between the small handful of genuinely elite Indian tech geniuses that may be migrated to the U.S. Because just because you have a point that's 2 or 3 standard deviations away from the median, that doesn't represent the median. The bulk of the people are still the middle of the curve, and they're mediocrities. There's nothing about them that cannot be replicated with Americans being paid those salaries and securing those jobs and spending and keeping the money in America, instead of having hundreds of billions of dollars in remittances back to third world countries. Garrick writes, we only need to allow a few O1 immigrants, 1% of 1%, for America to be successful. The H1B program is not that. The argument is that the H1B is being misused. And again, I mentioned O1 earlier. That's the genius track. Those people have their own track for migrating in. H1B is for the mediocrities. Douglas McKay, another good follow on X. End the H1B visa. Extremely talented individuals can still come to America by applying for an O1 visa. Individuals with extraordinary ability. The last thing we need in this country is a flood of computer janitors, great phrase, who committed visa fraud to get here, often with fraudulent academic and work experience credentials. We'll circle back to that in a moment. Marco writes, even the O1 is getting exploited hard these days. People with no remarkable credentials just hire specialist firms to get them through. Folks, we have to make this kind of conduct severe federal felonies. It has to stop. The gaming of the system is not, by definition, in America's interest, or America would have designed the system for that purpose. These people are acting contrary, not consistent with America's interest. Another thing I hear a lot, usually by inference, is this myth of the magical Indians. They're so incredibly capable. Look at all the amazing things they do for America when they get here. And a lot of people are asking, and I'm asking, if Indian workers are so skilled, why isn't India the center of the tech universe? Why does America look like America for the time being, and India looks and smells like India? Why is that? Oren McIntyre writes, sorry, but I'm not buying the argument that India or any other foreign nation has an army of gifted engineers who could improve their home nation and help them win in the global economy, but they just refuse to do it until they cross the U.S. border and then magically activate. Matthew Potts asks, why isn't India a high-tech paradise with all the brilliant engineers and tech geniuses? Why do they need to come here to America to have their brilliance recognized? And this is just a funny cartoon. This meme. Why did they leave India? Why did they leave India? And it's a good question. Why does winning for America require that we become more like India? When all the H1B folks who are supposed to be so awesome are fleeing India like it's a septic tank on fire, which arguably it is. Another comment from me is one of the reasons that India is poverty-ridden precisely because America lures away their best talent to create jobs here instead of creating jobs in India. And isn't this just reverse colonization? And isn't colonization a bad thing? By the way, couldn't we just employ all these people remotely? It's tech work. Why do they have to physically migrate themselves and their families and their extended families and their extended families to America? It is tech work. So who's actually benefiting from these Indian migrants coming in? We're supposed to believe they're so smart, so capable, add so much value. Value they don't add to India when they're in India. That's not reflected there. The data doesn't suggest they're actually any smarter or more capable. So what's actually happening? What's driving this mad rush to import millions of third world migrants for our tech industry? A lot of people says it's cost savings. They're just cheaper. They're not better. They are just cheaper. Here's Michael DeRobio. He writes, you missed the part where Indian outsourcing firms are abusing the H-1B visa program to import serf-like IT workers in order to replace high-skilled Americans and lower our wages. but maybe that was on purpose. Of course, he's not speaking to me there. Old Bay Sec writes, absolutely delusional take. This idea that Indian tech workers are somehow a great commodity is just thinly veiled wage suppression. U.S.-born tech workers will ask for higher salaries and not be chained to companies for immigration status. That's all this is. Critical Thinker writes, but you don't import the best of the best only through the H1B programs. How about we set a salary minimum for the most senior and advanced engineers only, $240,000 yearly and up? What he's trying to suggest here is, if it's true, because the tech companies will tell you, we're not bringing them because they're cheaper. No. We're not just trying to save money, drive down wages. That's not why we're bringing in these H1B migrants from the third world. The cost savings doesn't mean anything to us. If that's true, how about we eliminate the cost savings and then see how they hire? How about we put in place a system that effectively requires these companies to pay H1B migrants the same salary they'd have to pay for a similarly qualified American? How about that? A variety of ways that could be pursued. Upstate Federalist says, okay, increase a company's corporate tax rate by 1% per 100 HB1 visa-based workers. If those workers are that valuable, then the company should be able to absorb the increased tax cost with no problem, right? Kurt Schlichter, a buddy of mine, a great follow on X, writes, there's an easy solution to the H1B highly skilled visa issue. Since it's so vital, we have foreigners coming in because they are allegedly not enough Americans. Companies who want them can pay $50,000 a year tax on each visa worker that they hire, if they're that essential. And Victory Duck responds, 50K is not nearly enough. Put a 100 to 150% tax on H1B salaries, if not more. Make it cheaper to train an American than to import a foreigner, and you'll see a change overnight. That rings true to me. I don't know exactly what that kind of system should work like, but we should make the costs to import a third world migrant to do tech work in America should not be any less than the cost it would take to hire an American to do that. That's not in America's interest. Then we get to this weird schizophrenic thing that the Infinity Indian Migrants crowd likes to do. They simultaneously argue that, well, these Indian people we're bringing in, it's just, they don't cost us a lot of money. They're not taking high-paid jobs from people. They'll show you a chart like this. H1B salary databases. I don't know if it's easy to read, but it's all different companies, and the salary starts at about $49,000, goes up to $60,000, $63,000 at the bottom. These are not highly paid positions. If they're not highly paid positions, they're not high-skilled positions by definition. And if they're not high-skilled positions, why aren't Americans doing them? The problem is supposed to be the Americans are too stupid to do the high-skilled work, right? So why are we bringing in H1B to do computer janitor work? That's janitor salary, $40,000 a year. Why do we need migrants for that? Or are we supposed to believe Americans are too stupid for that too? But then at the same time, they argue, hey, listen, these migrants, they're not taking the good paying jobs. Look, they only make so little money. Then they'll show you another chart. It says, hey, no, we got to bring these migrants in. Look at the tremendous value they bring to America as reflected in the high salaries they get paid. I see various estimates. Anywhere, this is $126,000 for Indians. I've seen $170,000 claimed as their median salary. And on this point, I have to ask, well, if there's a $170,000 job in tech, why isn't an American doing that job? We can't train an American to do that job? We have to bring in millions of third world migrants to do that job at $170,000 a year? I don't believe it. I simply do not believe it. We've already seen the data indicating that, in fact, the foreigners are not superior at computer skills than the Americans. I suspect that an American of similar qualification might demand $300,000 a year. That's why the migrant gets the job. Storm 14 Echo writes, the cost reduction argument for H1Bs only applies before a company is infiltrated. So this is a great point. Great point. That's why I picked this one. The supporters of an infinity number of Indian migrants, they like to constantly move the goalposts. So you'll say, well, these migrants are only being hired because they're cheaper. And they'll say, oh, no. Look, they're actually making a lot of money. They're not cheap, like in the chart we just saw. But the fact is that the rationale for importing the migrants changes depending on the circumstances. When a company is hiring its first couple of Indian migrants for tech work, cost is very important. And so they're hiring people for not very much money. But once a few Indians have gotten into the tech department, once one of them gets into a hiring position, well, then the incentive to hire more Indian migrants becomes not cost related, but simply nepotism, simply accumulating power within the organization by completely staffing your department with nothing but Indian migrants. Very common pattern. So you can't say that the money doesn't matter and then say, oh, look, we're paying them this much. Surely the money must be irrelevant. No, there's other factors. It's a multi-variant problem. Storm Eagle writes, the cost reduction argument for H-1Bs only applies before a company is infiltrated. After infiltration, it's about helping out friends and family from the old country, and the company ends up spending more on staff than they did before the cost savings. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft each individually have around 150,000 engineers, yet they've developed fewer products than they did when they only had under 50,000 engineers each. Every non-tech Fortune 500 company has thousands to tens of thousands of Indian programmers maintaining internal business apps that were originally built by an American team several orders of magnitude smaller. This means that even if we deport them, we will likely still have a lack of jobs for many American programmers because the jobs the Indians had were unproductive and unnecessary. By the way, what did Elon find when he went into Twitter and bought it and renamed it X? Was there fat there? Did not Elon fire 85% of the company? And that includes engineers, by the way. When people tell you, no, that was admin and stuff. Nope. We're talking 85% of the tech engineers were fired. And X is working great, as far as I'm concerned. And then the nepotism. It's already been referred to just now. I'm going to cover it in more detail because it happens not just at the corporate setting, but in the academic setting as well. And if you filter out the white people at the academic setting, well, then, of course, they're unavailable to be interviewed and hired by business. Annie McGedden writes, grad student admission is largely decided by residing professors. Go to any U.S. research university and you can see the effect of Indian nepotism on research group demographics. And then she does a little experiment. She runs a selection of research groups she found by simply searching for Professor Gupta, which is a common Indian surname. And she found whole departments run by a Professor Gupta that had nothing but Indian migrant grad students. These are American universities. Coincidence? I think not. Andrew Torba, who I mentioned earlier, writes, this tech labor shortage is total nonsense. They think you're stupid. If you're a white male engineer in this country and you're unemployed right now, you can't even get an interview because many of the hiring managers at top tech firms are Indian and only hire their own. Anonymous Trader wrote, it's not that they are extremely talented, but rather that they only hire Indians. So statistically, you're going to end up with an Indian CEO. Go to Amazon, Google. All the engineers are Indian. And it's not due to Indian talent, but because they only hire other Indians. Now, again, I don't work in the tech field. Could this be untrue? But there's thousands of these posts on X. And there's no substantive counter argument. No one is showing data saying, no, it's not true all these departments are Indians. That's not true. Because they can't show that data. They are all Indians. Outside Life 123 writes, there's so much abuse with H1B1 visas. I have worked for several companies where Indian workers were brought in on these visas in order to help the existing American employee. And a few months later, the American was let go. Indians get into management and only hire H1B Indians. And here's Charles Wing Uxkull making the point I made a few moments ago. The fact that Elon was able to reduce headcount by 75% at X should have conclusively demonstrated that there is no shortage of tech workers in the US. The majority of tech companies are massively bloated, and further immigration is simply to keep wages low. There are many stories from American engineers who can't get interviews at firms with a 30% H-1B workforce. The whole program has been massively abused and needs to be shut down. What about this abuse? Fraud, cheating, abuse. Is the system rife with that? So this is a long string of, it's one long post by this account, Vish Bureau, but it was so informative. I had such insight. I wanted to share the whole thing with you. It's a story of patent abuse of the H-1B system, corruption, which obviously is not in America's interest. Vish writes, okay, since the H-1B visa and country caps in the tech sector and India and Indians are all a hot topic right now, I would like to address this as someone who has worked behind the scenes in H-1B consultancies in the tech sector and explained exactly why I'm against removing country caps, against the H-1B visa, and against the entire canard that we need to import more people from anywhere, let alone India, to do jobs that the tech sector can't find Americans to do. 1, sourcing talent. Big companies like Google and Meta have the resources to go and actually pluck out the actual best talent from these countries. And it's not hard for them to attract those applicants either because they have the brand recognition. All the best want to work for the best. This isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is all the no-name consultancies and mid-size, small-size consultancies. They can petition for H-1Bs too. How are they sourcing them? Well, they, usually run by Indians, just find a guy from Indian through their network who's willing to work for them and come to America. That's it. They make sure they have some kind of bachelor's or master's from some college out there and have the aptitude to learn and understand software. That's it. They aren't actually geniuses or anything like that. They are just willing to work and can learn to talk the talk quickly. 2, importation. Once the prospective worker agrees, the consultancy petitions the American government on their behalf, saying they tried to recruit for the job, a job that doesn't exist, in America, and couldn't find anyone. That's why they need to bring this guy. A key part of this is that the visa is tied to the employer. So if the employer drops the worker has to go back. He can't just get another job. This is the indentured servitude model. 3, the gambit. The consultancy makes sure the guy speaks English, and that's really it. The government can actually vet the workers on the knowledge they claim they have, especially a vast and sophisticated field like software. The government doesn't actually have a way to tell if someone is lying about their skills or not. All they have to do is convince the government that they can speak English so they can come and immediately start working there. 4, the actual job. Once they get the petition for visa approved and they come here, they find out, or already know, they actually don't have a job here yet. The consultancy now tries to find corp-to-corp contract gigs for the worker. That's if they actually know the tech and they're not faking. If they're faking their skills, another workflow is initiated. 5, training day or months. The fakers are trained up to 3 to 4 months in a software that's marketable and fetch a good hourly contract rate. Basically, a coding bootcamp style program. They go from zero to superficial knowledge in the tech, just enough to pass an interview with a potential client. 6, sell the fake. After training the fake for 3 to 4 months, the fake is provided with a fake resume claiming 7 to 8 years of experience. Why? Because that's how much experience is needed to demand a minimum of $50 per hour on a contract. Does it work? Duh. These workers trained for 3 to 4 months routinely fool interviewers looking for 7 to 8 years of experience. 7, the split. Once the job and rate is secured, the consultancy bills at $50 per hour and pays the actual worker the minimum, about $27.50 an hour, and the consultancy pockets the difference. Imagine 100 H1Bs on a roster doing this for you. Does this sound like fraud? Well, because that's what it is, from beginning to end. My buddy Jack Posobiec noted this in a court ruling. Cognizant IT firm discriminated against non-Indian workers to prefer H1B holders. Cognizant had the highest number of H1B visas of any U.S. employer from 2013 to 2018, according to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. A huge tech company. Discriminating, because you're allowed, apparently, to discriminate against white American men in job applications. In fact, the jury found that discrimination, and they were found liable for that, as shown here. And it's not just Cognizant. It's companies that will be familiar to you. Apple pays $25 million to settle suit over favoring foreign hires and making it so hard for U.S. workers to apply that few or none did for certain jobs. Oh, we can't find anybody. We looked for Americans for this job. We can't find anybody. I don't believe you. Facebook settles claims it discriminated against U.S. workers for some jobs in favor of temporary visa holders. The entire edifice is rotten and not in the interest of America or Americans. Aaron Wren writes, I have direct personal experience with how H-1Bs work in the real world. I was in the room where it happened. We were told we could not hire Americans unless we showed we could not use an H-1B. Much of people tell you about H-1B is a lie. That's exactly the reverse of how it should work, right? You should not be allowed to hire an H-1B unless there's genuinely not an American. Instead, they refuse to hire Americans unless there's genuinely not an H-1B or even fraudulently not an H-1B. Ershwich writes, H-1Bs are seldom what they are billed to be. Most of the countries they come from churn out diplomas not even worth the paper and ink. Outsourcing means numerous backdoors to steal IP. Joshua Lippincott writes, these third worlders with fake credentials are harder workers and smarter than you and your neighbors. You need to let them rule over you. Being sarcastic, of course. Nope. And I'm disinclined to do that either. I thought this was interesting because this is Tesla owner Silicon Valley that I don't think has any official association with Elon. But there's some kind of, maybe just a Tesla fan group. They write, what can we do to help our children get ahead? And Amado Carrillo Fuentes writes, engineering students from India have been at the top of engineering schools for at least 25 years. All the top-level PhD students were 70% from India. This is a long trend to turn around. First of all, I think that data is nonsense. I think it's the result of deliberate exclusion of white males from engineering pathways, both in academia and in corporations. We've seen evidence of that throughout today's show. So it's not that way because it is inherently that way. It's that way because the Indian migrants have gamed the system, contrary to the interest of America and Americans. The edifice is rotten. It needs to be completely torn down. I responded, why are you pretending that vast numbers of these supposed top-level PhD students are waving around utterly fabricated academic and work credentials and being hired based on their race and culture by the nepotistic Indians who preceded them, rather than on actual merits? All right, Andrew, what's your answer to all this? Well, I don't have a micro answer. I don't know how immigration should be run, per se. I do have general principles. I stated those at the start. I think America should prioritize the interest of Americans, period. Even at the cost of some purported foreign expertise. So my macro level solution is I'm not going to tell you what the system should be. I'm going to tear your system down. I'm going to rip it out by the roots. I advocate for an absolute freeze on immigration to the U.S. for a minimum of 5 years, for any reason, from any nation. They'll still want to come in 5 years. And maybe longer than 5 years. However long it takes for America to clean house internally. If that takes 10 years, so be it. If it takes 2 years, but genuinely happens, that's fine too. Maybe we can put Elon on it. But the current system, the edifice is corrupt. It must be torn down. No one has any confidence or faith in it. It serves only the interest of Indian migrants, not America or Americans. Here, Ashley Clare, also a good follow on X, writes, you cannot demand an increase in the flow of immigration into a system that is fundamentally broken. Unless it is dismantled and completely overhauled, it will remain a vessel of NGOs, lobbyists, and foreign interests to pillage America. I think that's demonstrably correct. Oilfield Rando, quoting here, we have a shortage of skilled workers. Okay, so we're finally going to fix the education system and abolish the teacher unions that destroyed them. And I would suggest get rid of affirmative action and DEI and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Nope. The response from the infinity Indian migrants count is, no, we're not going to do any of that. We're not going to fix anything in America. We're just going to bring in so many Indians that they'll be the sole ethnicity in every new apartment complex built. Is that what America wants? To become India? Phil Ken Sebbin says, why not try to get people from Europe? Engineers here in Northern Europe earn half of what U.S. engineers do. Yet you keep importing Indians instead. Could that be because Indians are even cheaper? Because of the nepotism? Because of the fraud in academic and work credentials? We've covered all that, right? Brotherhood writes, reject the notion that there aren't enough qualified tech hires. It's 100% false. Between American and white Europe, we have a supermajority of top tech talent. And then we wouldn't have to put up with this. Because Americans are not sending remittances overseas to foreign nations. And in my experience working with European migrants to the U.S., they also don't send their money back to Europe. Because there's plenty of money in Europe. It's the third world migrants. Look at this list. The largest top 10 remittance receivers in 2023, the nations, from migrants in the U.S. India, 125 billion. Mexico, 67 billion. China, 50 billion. Philippines, 40 billion. France is on there. I wonder why France is on there. Must be a hot mess. Egypt, 24 billion. Pakistan, 24 billion. Bangladesh, 23 billion. Nigeria, 20 billion. Guatemala, 20 billion. A top 10, one European country. Do we need our money going to Guatemala, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Pakistan, France for that matter, Egypt, Philippines, China, Mexico, India, hundreds of billions of dollars? I would suggest not. Mario Northball writes, HB1 lottery mess. New data shows mass gaming of visa system. U.S. Customs just exposed the scale of H1B abuse. Companies filed multiple applications for the same workers, inflating the pool of workers from 470,000 to 760,000 registrants. The whole edifice is corrupt. The Indians have gamed the system, contrary to Americans' interest. And even Elon recognizes the system is broken. How could he not? It would be nice to see him change tack and focus on fixing the system before importing a tsunami of mediocre Indian third world tech talent. But Ashley St. Clair writes, since we had good people come in on H-1B visas, she's being sarcastic here. Since we had good people coming on H-1B visas, let's ignore the rampant abuse of the system, the NGOs co-opting the abuse, and value technical skills above American values. If you have valid criticism of flooding our country with immigration, you're just a low IQ redneck. Again, she's being sarcastic there. Elon Musk responds, we need to fix the legal immigration process. Well, let's get on that, Elon. Before you import the migrants. Hugo Vale writes, white men aren't being hired anymore. A few months ago, I applied to work for X and noted on my resume that I was retired and didn't require any salary. I have a lot of experience as a mobile developer, didn't even get a response. Elon's answer was, we're just dumb. Well, I appreciate the humor, Elon, but we're just dumb is not a satisfactory response to the distress of millions of white male American workers who cannot get the tech jobs they spent their lives preparing for and their careers fostering because of low-wage Indian migrants who hire nepotistically and wave around wholly fraudulent academic and work credentials. We're just dumb is not a satisfactory answer. And I mentioned this earlier, but this comment touches upon it again. This is tech work. If we really need their extremely talented Indian expertise, why don't we do it remotely? Why do we have to migrate them, their families, and their extended families and all their friends to America to dilute our national culture? There's no technical reason for that. Now I just want to touch quickly upon some real nonsense arguments that are being made that are just moving the goalposts and smoke and mirrors. One is, hey, we got to fix the illegal problem first. Let's fix the illegal problem first. We'll worry about the legal immigration problems later. Here's one person making this argument. John Lonsdale, he says, this is my bias too. They don't want us united to fight for the USA. Illegal immigration is a 25 times bigger issue. Let's go hard on it. Then with legal, let's prioritize the results and impact on our shared principles and our workers who are born here. Let's keep them winning. Someday we'll address that. Like addressing the illegal immigration problem is not going to be a generational effort. But after we're done with that, we can look at how many tens of millions of Indian migrants we've imported into the country. Here's another one making this argument. 400,000 H-1B visa holders aren't your enemy. They're vetted, regulated, accounted for. A reminder of what lawful immigration should look like. I don't think this is what the system should look like. Utsav Sanduja. Meanwhile, he writes, 15 to 30 million illegal aliens live in America unvetted and unchecked. That's where our focus must be if we want to protect our sovereignty and our future. The hatred I've seen on this platform today is disheartening, especially on Christmas Eve and Day, a time for reflection and unity. Let's rise above the division, refocus our energy, and fight for the values that truly make America great. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, folks. We can do both. This is just administrative checkboxes. We can simply suspend H1B. And then if India really wants us to fix it, They can work with us to fix it. And at the same time, we can address the entirely separate problem. It's not like the same resources would be used to constrain H1B on the one hand and pursue illegal criminal aliens on the other. There's no overlap of resources there. So, nonsense. We can do both without any problem at all. Another nonsensical argument. Why do you hate Indian Americans? Why do you hate the Indian Americans? They're American citizens. Why do you hate them? No one's talking about Indian Americans. If you're an American citizen, we're not talking about you. And my response to people who make this argument is your efforts to conflate Indian Americans, presumably American citizens, with infinity H1B Indian migrants is very low IQ and not very on brand for Indians. Focus. No one's saying to throw American citizens out of America. Another issue here, of course, is electoral peril. We just had an election, right? Republican Trump, Democrat Kalama. Elon worked hard for Trump to get him elected, the Republican. One of the reasons he did was this: that the Democrats, according to Elon, were importing voters. That's what he's saying right here. They were importing people. They were going to fast track the citizenship, and we'd never have a contested election again because all those migrants would vote Democrat. So Elon recognized the risk here. He talked about it many times running up to the election. It was a key reason that he advocated for Trump, to avoid this from happening. But he seems blind to the identical risk in importing Indian migrants. Garbage Job Lane writes, the Indian American demographic votes 70 to 80% Democrat. The best Republican candidate of our lives, Trump, still lost the Indian vote 70 to 30. We will never win another election if we lift the caps and bring millions more Indians in. This is the equivalent of flooding India with Pakistanis. Do we never want to have a Republican administration again? That's one of the costs of infinity Indian migrants. And another argument made is that, well, what's in the world's best interest? America should be helping the world. No, sorry. We can help the world to the extent doing so is not inconsistent with our duties to Americans. America must prioritize the interest of Americans. Otherwise, why bother having a nation? This account, Piranha, poses as if there was a legitimate question. I wonder how this concept of limiting H1Bs is helping humanity as a whole. I don't care. I have no legal or moral obligation to help humanity as a whole. Indeed, no person or even nation has the means to do this. America is less than 400 million people. There are 10 billion people on the planet. We can't just help everybody. The best thing America could do for the world is to remain America and not become just another third world dump. In this one man's opinion. Now, J.D. Vance is giving hints. He hasn't said much in the last couple of days. It's been Christmas. Giving hints that maybe he'll be a little more productive here. Jack Posobiec notes, J.D. Vance says, new Congress must go after corporations replacing Americans with foreign H-1B visa workers. That's a good first step. Depends on how thick the rod is. But if we make the punishment substantial enough, that could go a great way to solving the problem. We'll see. It would be nice to see someone arguing in America's interest rather than just the tech industry's interest. And frankly, I think no matter how tightly we constrain the H-1B market, The tech industry will figure it out. They'll make it work. They're smart guys. They're smart. If we have an absolute 5-year embargo on third world migrants from any nation for any reason, you think tech will just vaporize? You think they won't figure out how to train Americans to do what needs to be done? Sure, it'll cost them more. They can get it done. Elon can catch rockets with chopsticks. I don't believe that a moratorium on mid-tier, third world Indian tech migrants will debilitate any U.S. tech company. It might make them more effective if they're not bloated with unnecessary third world Indian tech migrants. My thoughts here, I bet all you smart tech bosses will figure out a solution after H1B has been eradicated. Maybe that solution will simply be paying American tech engineers American wages. We'll see. But you're not going to commit corporate self-end simply because your supply of third world migrant techs has ended. I don't believe that's going to happen. And then a question for thought. Do we do something to stop importing millions of third world migrants into America? Or do we just give up on America? Because you can't have both. You pick America, American culture and heritage and tradition, or you import tens of millions of third world migrants. Those are your choices. It's very binary. Here's one proposal. Responder 224. Here's a novel idea. Groom our youth in future technologies. I can't believe that a European America cannot exceed the standard of the third world. I'm right there with you, Responder 224. Here's Gavin Mario Wax, sarcastically. Tech bros, once they realize they're losing this debate about H1B and importing infinity Indian migrants, okay, fine, we need to cut back on H1B, but we need a decade to train Americans, so we need to import in the meantime. Nope. You've lied to us for so long and so badly and such terrible cost. You don't get the grace of a time period to adjust. If you wanted that, you should have started 10 years ago. You should have made this statement 10 years ago, and you would have had the last 10 years to straighten this out. We do not trust you. We see you for being the self-serving agents you are, acting contrary to America's interest. You've had plenty of time to not do this. And you're not only still doing it, you're asking to double it. No, we're done. The edifice is corrupt. It must all be torn down today. Gavin writes, his voice now, no, you duplicitous snakes. You're going to rehire all the Americans you fired and replaced, and you're going to hire the many young Americans who have the skills but just want a living wage. And then Kaizen Asedu, my apologies if I mispronounced that. He's a good follow on X, very thoughtful guy. Looks a little weird, but he's a very thoughtful guy. He writes, if we don't allow more immigrants to fill elite engineering roles in the short term, America will fall behind. At the same time, if we don't develop more elite domestic talent in the long term, America won't be American. So there's a dilemma there. My position is I'm prepared to fall behind in the short term. I'll take a slightly behind America that is still America, because America can catch up. If you obliterate America with tens of millions of migrants, third world migrants, there is no America. Not in any meaningful way. America has just become another third world country. All right, folks. I know, very long. I'm going to wrap this up, but I do want to remind you all, as I'm recording this, this is a real-time number. We currently have Law Self-Defense, 99,362 subscribers. We'd love to hit 100,000, of course. Get that nice little silver plaque. Be a real milestone for us. So if you like this kind of content, would like to see more of it, be very grateful if you would hit that subscribe button. If you believe you're already subscribed, I would double check because YouTube does unsubscribe people without telling them. So please check. Fewer than 700 of you now, and we hit the 100,000 mark. So that would be great. That would be really appreciated. And before I close out, I just want to say again that I know many of the tweets I read and the sentiments expressed may have been harsh. I don't necessarily abide by every sentiment expressed or how it was expressed. I wish well for all people in this world. I have no animosity to Indian migrants or anybody else. I wish them nothing but the greatest success. But America must prioritize the interests of Americans. And that's not happening right now. And that's my objection. It would be awesome, in my view, if all these amazingly talented Indian tech lords turned India into a tech powerhouse. Would it be an interesting day if Americans were migrating to India to work there? That's how successful India had become. I would applaud India. I mean, it's going to be a tough job. America's pretty tough to beat. But I would like to see India substantially raise their standard of living to the point where they don't feel compelled to migrate to the U.S. Let them develop in their own culture, their own society, for their own people. So I wish them all the very best. But there are many, many millions of Americans who are extremely frustrated, unhappy about how this third world migration process is being run, especially in the tech sector. Because not only is it contrary to America's interest, it's highly detrimental to them as individuals who spent their lives developing academic credentials and work experience in pursuit of these tech sector jobs and are being excluded simply because they're white, they're male, they ask a living wage. That's not good enough as far as I am concerned. All right, folks. I'll sign off in the usual way. Remember, if you carry a gun, so you're hard to kill. That's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill. Then you also owe it to yourself and your family and your career in the context of today's show to make sure you know the law and participate in the political process. So you're hard to convict and hard to be discriminated against by third world migrants, answering the siren call of American tech companies looking to save a few bucks. Until we meet again, I remain attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.